discussion about what we expect and the meaning of what we're going to hit once the conventions are over and what it's going to look like from now until Election Day. So just waiting for a couple folks to come on. Looks like everyone's good to go. You probably know most of the faces you see here, the incomparable Rick Wilson, one of our co-founders, Mike Madrid, another one of our co-founders. He's the demographic brain and polling brain behind things. Steve Schmidt, who everyone knows, Mr. 10 on Rate Your Room. And if we were on MSNBC right now, he'd definitely get a 10 for his kid in the background. Kids and animals are always a popular
Zoom
thing.
bombing.
Gotta love it. You gotta love it. And Stuart Stevens, who is one of our senior advisors. Stuart wrote an amazing book called It Was All a Lie. We're going to talk about that in a little bit too. He spent many decades running Republican races and campaigns, just like Steve and Rick and Mike have. So it's we got a good group here tonight. So let's get it going. Just quickly, as a quick overview, the RNC guys. What do you think we're going to expect? I mean, what we're hearing so far is that it's going to be basically an episode every night. We all know that Donald Trump comes from the reality show world. That's how every day of the presidency feels like it's an episode being produced. So we're actually going to see that. Republicans it's been a haphazard effort putting this together. Democrats had enough sense to go virtual months ago, so they had a lot more lead time in their preparation for this. And the Republicans have gone from Charlotte in person. No, we're going to take our ball and go to Jacksonville, and then Florida, where you are, Rick, turned into a COVID hotspot. And, Jacksonville said, no, sorry, we can't do it. We can't pull it off that soon. And now it's turned into a semi-virtual, mostly live White House, South Lawn, the White House production, which we'll talk about violations of the Hatch Act that involves. Just really quickly, Rick, what stands out to you about the upcoming RNC?
Well, look, I think that what we've seen so far in the previews of this, Tara, is that this is a RNC about supporting and retaining the hardest core of the hardcore of the Republican base. You saw with the Democrats this week, they were trying to expand their aperture. They were trying to gather people into the party and into the effort to elect Joe Biden, including moderate Democrats, including independents, including Republicans. With the Trump campaign this week, you will not see that. You will see a very narrow bracket. It's going to be the hardest core, the red hat MAGA fanatics, the Trump hottie caucus. They're going to be as the intensity level is going to be through the roof for Donald Trump, because the vote model he's looking at, I think Mike can affirm this, they're trying to get non-college white dudes up to in the 67, 68% number. That's their path to victory. It's difficult because the country's not that way anymore, but it's the only path they've got. And so they're going to use it this week. They're going to maximize the conspiracy craziness, the deep state, all the Fox News type showmanship that you could hope for. So it's a base only campaign.
Yep. Something else that I think we're going to see that I'm alarmed about, in contrast to the diversity of the DNC last week. I thought they did a great job with showing the diversity, not only just of the country and the demographics, but just of ideological diversity, right? Bringing in John Kasich and some other Republicans that I thought was smart of them to do. But it also showed the urgency of the moment that we're in, that this is bigger than party, which is something that you don't really see. I've been to 6 conventions. I'm probably the youngest one here that, and been to the least amount of conventions compared to the veterans here, everybody else. But you don't see that. You maybe get one, Democrat that's kind of, that'll come there, but not like at the level that you saw a former Republican presidential candidate and governor, like John Kasich. That was pretty extraordinary. But I'm concerned about the racial overtones that we're going to see going into the RNC, and just the division that they're going to further double down on, this law and order, very this rehash of Nixon's Law and Order and the Southern strategy, which I wrote about for CNN.com for a kind of a preview of the future of the Republican Party. And I said that the party will go the way of the Whigs if it doesn't get its act together. It needs to abandon these things, abandon the conspiracy theories and all of the craziness that Trumpism has represented, including the nationalist populism and the white grievance part of the party. Otherwise, it's not going to survive in the long term, which is a good segue into talking about Stu's book, and then we'll come back to the RNC and some other things. But so Stuart Stevens wrote a book called "It Was All a Lie," and how the Republican Party became Donald Trump. And I was telling Stuart before we went live how reading this book has made me really reevaluate a lot of things that I was a part of as a Republican, and recognize having to face some of the uglier history and underbelly of the Republican Party that I knew was there, but just didn't want to admit to being as prevalent as it still is. Stu, like, what made you finally say, I've got to write a book? Because it really is a mea culpa. And you did an amazing job laying it all out. I mean, you really laid it all bare here. What was the final straw for you?
Well, in 2016, a lot of people were wrong about Donald Trump, but I think it's pretty hard to find anybody who was more wrong than me. I said he wouldn't win the primary, win the general. And I realized in retrospect, a lot of that is because I didn't want to admit what it would say about the party. And if you go back to the whole Republican primary, those 15 other candidates all tried to beat each other up and just to get one-on-one with Trump, because surely the Republican Party we knew wasn't going to nominate a failed casino owner who talked in public about having sex with his daughter. I mean, that just wasn't going to happen.
More than once.
Which wasn't crazy. It just turned out to be wrong. And then I went through a stage after Trump won saying, like, this isn't really the Republican Party. And I know a lot of friends that still say that, and I kind of admire that. I mean, I think you ought to fight for the party you believe in, but I just couldn't get there. I mean, this is the party. It's a true statement that endorses Roy Moore and attacks John Bolton and Liz Cheney on off days. So I really wanted to ask myself, how did this happen? How did we get here? And I went back and I looked at the post-World War II history of the party. And what was really striking is that there'd always been these two elements of the party that played itself out. I mean, if you go back to the 50s, there was Eisenhower and there was McCarthy. And these two elements played out. And if you go to 1999, when the Bush campaign started, and I moved down to Austin in April of 99, we really, I think at that point, conservatism was sort of a victim of its own success in many ways. We'd won the Cold War. Welfare had been a big issue. I mean, Bill Clinton instituted welfare reform. Crime had been a big conservative issue. Crime was declining as it continued to. Taxes were down from the 70% that they were. So Governor Bush asked himself, what is it to be a conservative in this next century? And out of that came this whole sort of ethos of conservative, compassionate conservatism. And when you look back at that, for Bush, the key access into that was education. So he knew a lot about it. He was passionate about it. You know how it is when you sit around in a campaign and you're trying to fill that calendar, you really don't know what to do, which happens more than we like to admit. Our default in the Bush campaign was send him to a school, probably in a disadvantaged area. And he'd light up and he'd be great. And, it's no coincidence on 9/11, when it happened, he was in a school reading.
Right.
This is what he loved.
One of the most memorable moments of the Bush campaign in 2000 was during the debate where he was asked about a civil rights question. And he said it was the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah.
Whoever came up with that line.
Mike Gerson.
There you
Mike
go.
Gerson.
Thank you. I'm glad you added him because it was fantastic.
Fantastic. So he passed No Child Left Behind. And, if you go back and you look at that signing is Ted Kennedy over his right shoulder. And now we presented like a war crimes tribunal, like who is this traitor? But that we thought that the side of the party we were on was inevitable. That we had to fight for it, but that we would win, and we didn't. And I really wanted to ask myself how this happened and how we didn't see it. I didn't see it. And I very much didn't want to write a book that said, look at what these other people did. because, one of the things that drew me to the party in the first place was this concept of personal responsibility, which is completely thrown out the window now. We're the ultimate victims party.
Yep.
But I think if you believe in personal responsibility, it sort of makes sense that it begins with personal responsibility.
In your book, you say that the most distinguishing characteristic of the current National Republican Party is cowardice. You also talk about how it's okay to say no, and you tell a story about your dad and how he walked away from the FBI. And he told you that you can always say no, and how things in this party that there should have been said no to have not, and how that is part of the cowardice of the party. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, my dad, I'm from Mississippi, and my dad was from Mississippi, and he was an FBI agent when the war broke out. And he was having the time of his life, to be honest. He was living in New York City, basically chasing spies and going to a lot of plays at night. And then they were ordered to round up Asian Americans. And he did it for a day, and then he quit. He just couldn't do it. And he joined the Navy and spent 3 years in the South Pacific, 28 island landings, but never regretted it. And one of his lessons was always that you can always say no. One of the things that just disturbs me, it offends me so much, and I know others here share this, that these politicians today, these Republicans, are heir to this greatest generation. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people are like my dad, who just went off, fought this war, my uncle, who was machine gunned in Europe and never really recovered, but became a civil rights lawyer. That's the legacy that was handed to these politicians. And courage isn't standing up to Donald Trump, some ridiculous guy. Courage is getting out of the boat when the guy in front of you got shot. And that's their legacy. And I just think they betrayed it. And it's just, there's no other way to say that they have just reacted to cowardice. I mean, I challenge anybody to convince me and make a case that if these Republicans were in charge in 1776, we wouldn't still be celebrating the Queen's birthday. I mean, you know what they would say. What are we going to do? Fight the king? Really?
Right. I use the Civil War as an example. I say, if these Republicans were in charge, people who look like me would still be enslaved.
You know what they're going to say? What are we going to fight the king?
Right.
We're going to go to war over the country, over this little thing called slavery. We'll work this out. And I don't understand it. I mean, one of the things that baffles me is politicians tend to have big egos, which I think it's fine. So do great musicians, artists, writers, athletes. But don't they understand how they're going to be seen and remembered? And not in 20 years. I'm talking just very near future. So you lose a primary. Is that not more important than losing yourself? I don't get it.
Apparently, it has not been, given the way that so many Republicans who knew during 2016 that Trump was unfit still know to this day that he's unfit, that have decided to sell their souls and make that Faustian bargain just to stay in power because they're cowards. Steve Schmidt, Stuart, thank you for talking about your book. We'll keep talking about it, guys. Get it. It was all a lie. It's really, especially if you're a Republican or struggling with it, it really puts it in perspective for you. Steve Schmidt, we talk about what's happening with the convention, the future of the party. Stuart lays out some great examples of just the absolute embarrassing walk back into areas, very dark areas of this country and history with the current Republican Party. How do you see it?
Well, when I was listening to Stuart talk about his father, I was reminded of the American Cemetery in Normandy, France. And when you go there, there's almost 10,000 graves, almost all of them crosses and stars of David, a couple of crescents. All of those graves are symmetrically perfect. It's an army at final permanent rest, and every grave faces west, back towards home, looking out across the Atlantic Ocean that those young men crossed but would not return from. There's 38 pairs of brothers buried there. There's 2 sons of a president of the United States, one of them a recipient of the Medal of Honor. there is a statue that celebrates America's youth rising from the waves to restore freedom to Europe. And there is a mural above the chapel in the center of the cemetery that shows the prayers of the American people for their safe return as the young men are leaving our shores to go and fight for freedom. And I wonder what that silent army at rest would think and how they would judge us in this moment in time, when you consider the sacrifices that have been paid many times over in blood to give us the greatest inheritance that you could ever be given, and that's citizenship in the United States of America. That to be a citizen of this big, sprawling, vast, imperfect country, to be part of a generation that gets to make the Union more perfect. And that's what all Americans are called to do and are connected to each other through the generations. We are stewards of the Constitution of the United States for a short time, with the idea that we give the country to our kids and our grandchildren something stronger, something more just, something better. And so we're in the middle of this rancid moment in the history of the nation, and we are dealing with the worst president in the history of the republic. Mm-hmm. We have an illiberal man, someone with an autocratic disposition in the White House, who has attacked our institutions, who has assailed the rule of law, somebody who has divided the country and stoked a cold civil war, somebody who is overtly racist, somebody who has given moral succor to white nationalists and neo-Nazis who celebrate him and feel validated and mainstreamed as part of the political process. We see a president whose incompetence has directly led to the deaths of over 175,000 Americans, and that number will cross 200 certainly before the election, and by the time it's all over, maybe as high as our total casualties in the Second World War, which were 405,000 dead. And so we have a choice in this election, and the choice is really a very simple one. It's a choice between a good man and a very bad man. It's a choice between a decent man and an indecent man. It's a choice between a moral man and an amoral man. Mm-hmm. A choice between a global statesman and an international laughingstock, between a competent man and a competent woman, and between two incompetents at galactic levels with Trump and Mike Pence, people who simply can't do the job. And so what I would say is that we're all called on in this election to make sure we vote. As soon as you are eligible to get a ballot, get your ballot. At the first moment that you can fill that ballot out, fill that ballot out. At the first moment that you can deliver that ballot to the appropriate place for it to be counted, deliver the ballot. But it's not just enough to vote. You have to bring 2 to 3 other people along with you and make sure that they vote. And it's not just enough to vote. You have to volunteer. You have to be engaged. Volunteer to be a poll watcher in your community. More than 70% of the poll watchers are over 70 years old. Donald Trump's intention is trying to cause chaos on election day. No one's asking anyone to storm Omaha Beach, but it is appropriate as an American to put yourself in harm's way. And that's what you would be doing to be a poll watcher on election day. But it's worth it because our democracy is at stake in this election. It's the most important election since 1864, when we decided as a country, whether we would remain a union or not.
That's right.
Yeah.
We should remember that the country has been tested before. We have faced darker crises in hours than we do now, though we are in the middle of one of the great crises in the history of our country. And it will not end until Donald Trump is removed from power. And in a second Trump term, we will see an emboldened Trump, and we will see the extinguishing of the American experiment as it's existed for over 240 years.
That's for sure. That's without question. I think we saw a lot of that sense of urgency during the DNC last week. And whether that resonates with the American people or not, if they really understand the moment that we're in, we'll find out. Mike Madrid, you study these things, these trends, the demographics. To Steve's point about, people have got to get out there and vote. This is an existential threat to our democracy. Is this resonating? What's the state of the race right now? What's it looking like?
Thanks. That's a great question. And I think Rick did a really good job of setting up kind of what is happening with the state of the race at this moment as we enter the kind of final stretch here. The first thing to recognize, especially as we begin watching the Republican National Committee's convention, is that these are going to be two starkly different approaches and two starkly different strategies. I think the Democratic National Committee's convention, Joe Biden's convention, was probably as engaging and as broad-based a convention as I have ever seen, ideologically, from a gender perspective, racially and ethnically. And I think that you'll probably see the exact opposite from Trumpapalooza, which I think he'll be speaking at every night. He'll have some sort of venue to make sure he's in front of the camera. The reason for that is, again, exactly what Rick said. The strategy here is to replicate a peculiar phenomenon where he won by subtraction, which in most cases never works. One of the oldest adages in politics is you win by addition. Donald Trump, utilizing the Electoral College, literally won by subtraction. He lost the largest margin in popular vote history and secured a razor-thin Electoral College victory. The way he was able to do that was by overperforming with a non-college educated white base, driven largely by what you correctly identified were white identity politics, a politics of white grievance, a roadmap, which Stuart Stevens has kind of illustrated to us, has been emanating for some time, a dynamic which most of the polling would suggest was lurking beneath the surface until it was completely stoked and thrown gas on top of during the Trump administration. And he believed that he can replicate that victory. There's a couple of things that may be changing that dynamic. The first thing is to understand is that we've always expected and anticipated a historical tightening in this race. A lot of us have been involved in these types of campaigns for some time. All of our history, all of our experience, every race we've ever done would suggest that this race is going to get closer. That was never in doubt. The question, of course, as to which groups we're moving and which ones tighten is an important one. Let me talk a little bit about that really quickly. The first is during the peak of COVID nationally, and even its early start back in March and April, we began to see something that we all intuitively understood here at the Lincoln Project, and that was that there would be some sort of weakening in the Republican base if approached appropriately. Those numbers started to see the president realize a downward trajectory towards the lowest point of his presidency, and it's remained there for about 3 or 4 months. It is now consolidating, it's coming back, but it is not necessarily increasing his share with where he's at with Joe Biden. Joe Biden has held the strongest, most consistent position in, if not the history of Gallup polling, 1 or 2 races from the late 1940s when we began monitoring public opinion data. His position is remarkably stayed, it's remarkably consistent. The floor and the ceiling range is remarkably again, consistent, and it's not moving, driven in large part by the fact that there is much pro-Biden sentiment as there is anti-Trump sentiment. One main factor to keep in mind as the polls start to bounce around a little bit. The second is there are far fewer undecideds than there were in 2016. Many will remember at this point in the election, there was a lot of debate as to who Americans liked least and who they would hold their nose for in order to vote. Donald Trump won that share of the vote in the 2016 election. And if polling holds consistent, Joe Biden will win that by about a 25-30% share, which is pretty significant. That, of course, is a key constituency that the Democrats were speaking to in the midst of their convention. In fact, the entirety of their convention. They were speaking directly to that voter. We'll see if Trump and the Republicans are able to do that, but or to compete with that. But my strong suspicion is, as again, Rick pointed out, the strategy here is going to be dramatically overperforming with white non-college educated voters in very specific geographic regions of the state. One of the other challenges that they face with this strategy, of course, is we are beginning to see the college educated versus non-college educated Republican coalition split in two. Donald Trump won a record low 34% of college educated whites, when he was elected president. That number has been on the decline. Women specifically with college degrees completely abandoned him in 2018. It's the reason why Democrats picked up as many seats as they did in the House in the midterms, despite Trump running against the caravans that suddenly disappeared the day after Election Day. So utilizing these race-based issues is also, it may be consolidating a lot of non-college educated white voters in Rust Belt states, but it is having the unintended effect of driving away college educated Republicans in places in the Sun Belt, specifically Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, and you're even seeing Texas and Georgia start to tighten up in a really uncharacteristic fashion because there's a disproportionate share of college educated white workers that have really redefined the Sun Belt states. So in many ways, Trump has hastened a dynamic, a realignment, if you will, between what will constitute the Republican base, increasingly a tenuous hold on the Rust Belt states in the Midwest, and a more expansive electoral coalition based largely of a multicultural America that is really flexing its muscles in the Sun Belt states. And you could see the Democratic Party this cycle not just be the party of the coasts, but the bottom Sun Belt perimeter in a U-shaped fashion that will become the new electoral basis of the Democratic Party.
It's pretty remarkable to see those shifts, even though they've been kind of gradual, but just so intensely shifted, even just since 2016 into 2018 to now. That it's, Republicans, and Stuart talks about this in his book, we looked at it like we were supposed to be the big tent, right? We needed to recognize after 2012 that we had to be a big tent if we were going to win anymore, and then just went the complete opposite direction, which brings me back to Rick Wilson. This RNC coming up, I suspect that we're not going to hear these messages of inclusion and the diversity, celebrating the e pluribus unum out of many one that makes America great. We're gonna, are we gonna hear from QAnon? I mean, what are we gonna find? What is the Republican Party going to present this time around at the RNC? Because it's going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before.
It's gone from big tent to pup tent in about 4 years. And what you're going to see, about a quarter of the speakers at this event are immediate family members of Donald Trump. And so this, to my mind, when a president, the spouse typically speaks, the eldest children typically speak. But this has now become part of an infomercial for Donald Trump. And so you're going to see a lot of blind praise of Trump. You're going to see a lot of winking and nodding to the conspiratorial wing of the party, which is now the entire party. You're going to see people making references to the deep state. And you're going to see people making references to plots against the president and conspiracies by powerful insiders against the president. Those are all winks and nods to this QAnon subculture of batshit crazy lunatics who now are a powerful center inside the GOP. They're electing them to office. They are now mainstreamed by aides to the president, like Dan Scavino and others. They are now given a lot of subtle and not so subtle hints that the president loves them. When he says, "Well, they like me, therefore I like them." For Donald Trump, we know that covers a multitude of sins.
Right.
He likes Ghislaine Maxwell because she liked him.
He's in love with Kim Jong-un, for God's sakes. Right. He bragged about love letters. So the bar is pretty low.
You're going to see a lot of winking to the conspiracy world. You're going to see a lot of very unsubtle moments where your suburbs are under attack by those people.
Yeah.
Only I can stop those people from coming to your suburban neighborhoods and bringing taco trucks and ruin. And so you're going to see a lot of that. You will see one or two. They will pull out, a couple people that they're going to posture as, civil rights icons in some way in their world. But I don't know, call me crazy, but Diamond and Silk could work for like 20,000 years in civil rights and maybe get to be like a third of a John Lewis. It's just not, it's going to be a base centric, crazy centric, Trump fellation centric message.
Oh, Rick Wilson, away with words. Diamond and Silk, who I affectionately call Step and Fetch It. I remember in 2016 in Cleveland, I was there at the CNN hangout. CNN always takes over a bar at these conventions.
Yes.
Where everyone can go and rehydrate and eat and congregate. And I remember Diamond and Silk trying to get in. And I was standing there going like, who are these flunkies and why are they here? Like, I just could not believe that they were getting the type of attention that they were getting. And now they're, we see them in the White House and laying hands on the president with the rest of the grifters over there. It's despicable.
Pastor Paula, baby.
Oh, good Lord. I'm not even going to go there with her evangelicals right now.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
The center ring of craziness with all this used to be that CPAC convention, right?
Oh yeah, I've been in many.
Right. It's like, and that's like the creature cantina from the Star Wars movies, right? But now, right, the Republican convention is a full-on CPAC convention, but worse, right? It's CPAC merged with QAnon. I mean, this is a collection of miscreants and weirdos and strangeness, nuts. I mean, there's literally on the entire speaking roster, there are only two people. I think Dan Crenshaw and Kevin McCarthy, maybe Nikki Haley, but okay, three people who would speak at any normal Republican convention. I mean, it's just the cast of characters. I mean, it's just, I'm waiting for the late editions of Meatloaf and Little John and Gary Busey, right? So we can fuse the Apprentice years, into this as well. It is going to be a week of unprecedented nuttiness, just nuttiness.
Well, Steve, I just heard somebody texted me a few minutes ago. A friend of mine texted me a few minutes ago that the Apprentice producers were brought in this weekend to start trying to reshape the convention. And I know that Stuart and Steve and I and Mike have all worked conventions.
Me
too. The planning for real conventions, everybody starts about a year in advance or more.
Yep.
Okay. At a real convention, there are people on the ground for 60 plus days doing the logistics. Bringing in the Apprentice producers over the weekend can have only one result, and that is added levels of shit show. It's going to be fantastic.
Oh yeah. I was, you took the words out of my mouth, because I was actually going to ask Stuart, because I know he's worked, in his capacities on conventions. I have too. I lived in San Diego the entire summer.
That's right.
Working on that convention back then. And I tell you what, that was one of I almost quit politics over it, because it was really the first time that I saw the internecine backstabbing and arguing and jockeying for position when we were all supposed to be on the same team, for goodness sakes. I was 20 years old and very wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and all about the cause. And I was like, to hell with this. What is wrong with these people? I literally almost quit politics as a result. And when I came back, that was the fall of 96, and literally the fall of 96, because Bob Dole fell off the stage not long after that. At a campaign event. And I said, well, that's it. He's got no shot now. I'm going to be a normal college student for a semester. And of course, that didn't last long. I was right back into politics by winter. But Stuart, how abnormal is it for basically no establishment Republicans to be a part of the Republican convention? And how abnormal is it for it to take place on White House grounds? Because I know a lot of people are asking questions about this, and I know people are watching want to know.
that's illegal. You know, I've shot inside the White House, and you go to great lengths not to use any of the staff inside the White House. And only in the White House residence are you allowed to shoot. It's the Trump campaign is a criminal enterprise, and what they basically say is stop us. They're gangsters, and that's how gangsters operate. There's no sense of right or wrong. But you know, one thing I think is always been true about conventions, that they are a celebration of democracy. That you may not agree with what you're seeing, but there's something about it. So even, you know, watching the other side, you come away with some, like, there's something positive about this. But I think one of the threads in this convention is it's going to be an anti-democratic convention with lower D, anti-democratic, because a thread of all this is going to be, this is not a legitimate election. And Trump wants to do that for two reasons. One, he's preparing to lose because he'll never say that he lost a legitimate race. And two, they want to be able to lay the groundwork to take extraordinary measures to make sure it's not a legitimate election. And I think, you know, it just comes down to, you have to ask yourself, if you ask Donald Trump and those, you know, crooks and castoffs around him, okay, this would end American democracy, but Donald Trump could be president. I think the answer would be, what's the catch? I don't get it. What, you know, what is the question?
Absolutely.
You know, they have no sense of that. And I think that one of the reasons you're not seeing prominent mainstream Republicans speak here is because it's in preparation for the denial of Donald Trump. And they don't want video there. They don't want to say that they were the ones that were there. You know, it's like this thing that we saw in 2016 after the Access Hollywood tape came out, when people said, well, I'm going to vote for Mike Pence. It's like, sorry, you don't get to do that. That's like saying I'm where the first 10 rows of the plane are going, but not the second 10 rows.
Right.
The plane's going to the same place, man.
Right.
You either get on the plane or you don't.
This way.
That's where I was going to say, that plane's going down and it's crashing.
And so I think that it's this denial of Trumpism that people want to, or Trump, that they want to do it, but it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be something really disturbing about that. This idea that what is going to happen here with millions and millions and millions of Americans voting is going to be illegitimate. That's fundamentally anti-American instinct.
You mentioned that it's illegal. And would that be because of the Hatch Act? Just so I'm clear into other people, right? The Hatch Act doesn't allow, just explain briefly what that is and why it would be illegal. And also the precarious situation that this administration's putting the military in, because you have military aides that work inside the White House and things like that. And we already saw what happened with General Milley during that, you know, during the protests. Like, explain what the Hatch Act is, why it's illegal, and like the military too.
Is the greatest set in the world, right? It's not like this hadn't occurred to other people. Like, wouldn't it be great to like beam live campaign events from the White House? It's not like, you know, these are for people to think about it. It's just illegal. And the idea is that this is supposed to represent not a party, but it's supposed to represent the United States, everybody. So there's very specific laws that govern how you're supposed to act inside the White House or any office. And, you know, as much as I'm kind of down on a lot of politicians these days, politicians I knew in the Republican Party, they would leave their office to make fundraising calls.
That's right.
I mean, they would go over to the senatorial, or they would
Capitol Hill Club.
You know, they would go outside. They had a respect for this. It wasn't like the FEC was like standing there, because the FEC has always been kind of a joke, but they respected it. Trump has no respect for this. And the law is just, you can't use people who are federal employees to help you put on a political event like this. And they're just going to do it. And it's just one more degradation of the office that Trump is leaving us with.
And unfortunately, we don't have an attorney general that would prosecute it or, enforce it. They've already determined that Kellyanne Conway and others have already violated the Hatch Act more than once. They just, Stephen Miller, all of them, they don't give a damn. They do whatever the hell they want because they know that they have Bill Barr there to do whatever Donald Trump wants.
That's sort of a metaphor for how they fail civil society. Because, civil society is based on self-limits. When it's midnight, you come to a red light, most of us stop, but not because there's like cops right there, but this is how sort of society works. You have to limit yourself.
Right.
And they don't do that. To them, it's just all smash and grab. They smash and grab democracy. What is it that we can get away with? And if you can't stop us, then it's legal. And it's absolute, for a party that once represented law and order, that thought this was an important element of what being an American was and being a citizen. It's just so disgusting.
Trump has learned, Tara, that Trump has learned his whole life has been one long escape from accountability. And especially with Bill Barr, he will violate every rule, every norm, every law, as long as he gets away with it and can blow up everything around him and move on to the next crisis. He continues to be in this position where no accountability comes to him. So, as Steve was saying earlier, folks, the centrality of getting out to vote this year is the only way Donald Trump will ever be held to account. Until he's out of office, he's going to have the ability and the desire and the capacity to abuse power in new and novel ways every single day. And that's something I think is, for the country, is too great a risk for us to say, oh, well, voting by mail is inconvenient, or getting out to vote on election day is inconvenient or scary. You've got to strap up and get out there because otherwise he will continue to get away with this. And the longer he's in this field getting away with this, the worse off we are as a country.
Absolutely. And I think many wouldn't, you can just look around and see that our American way of life has been completely ripped apart, not only before COVID, just by the way Donald Trump has destroyed protocols and democratic norms and attacked institutions. But now, like, just things from barbecues to football games to going to school, going to college, these things have been taken from us because of Donald Trump's ineptitude with the handling of COVID. Mike Madrid, the economic devastation that we're looking at as a result of this, can this be the nail in the coffin for him? Does Trump have a shot at turning this around? What do you think?
So this actually is the one area where Donald Trump remained somewhat resilient. Up until fairly recently, he was actually leading Joe Biden on the economic question. Now that it's become much more reality, now that a lot of the funds have dried up and a lot of small businesses are closed and gone forever, his numbers are underwater. He's behind Biden now, but it is still his strongest area of at least the minds of his supporters and the folks that he's going to need. It is the area where he does remain somewhat resilient. More importantly, I think that this the goal here, the strategic goal beyond the law and order message, will be an attempt to say that before all of this happened, before the forces outside of our power unleashed this virus from a lab in China and attacked us, something we couldn't control, we had the greatest economy in the history of the world. I just am not convinced that selling the argument or the question of, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago back in February, does that work? I'm not convinced that it does. I think that as the reality of the economic downturn becomes more real and more impactful in the average American's life every day between now and the rest of the election, I think those numbers will probably start to point downward. What we've also seen is some of the economic devastation after the COVID infection spikes in certain parts of the state becomes particularly problematic. And again, I'm going to point to Florida, I'm going to point to Arizona, I'm going to point to the Sun Belt states where Donald Trump's support levels dropped and Republicans across the Republican coalition started to lose faith in this president because they saw what the incompetence and mismanagement of this pandemic actually brought. And not just in the loss of life, although that, of course, should be the central point of concern, but in the economic destruction that it left in its wake. a lot of these areas, especially in suburban areas, we're not just talking about the urban core or rural areas. We're talking about suburbia, where people have had to dramatically change their way of life, have seen every day and witnessed every day what ineffectual governance actually means. And I think that the economic impact, again, is going to take it away from the abstract and make it real. A lot of the big questions we've always had is, how can people put up with a man who will, cage children and take them away from their parents on the border? Or how can he do all of these outlandish things? The reality is they're just abstract notions to most people.
Right.
This pandemic and this economic impact is going to affect every American citizen. Most of it already has, but it's going to get worse. The downward trajectory for the economy is not hopeful. It is not good. And as that starts to settle in, I think we're going to start to see some of his numbers follow that downward trajectory as well.
I also think that that's going to be the exit ramp for some of the establishment Republicans that have decided to, not be a part of this convention, as Rick was talking about too, you're not, and Stu, they're trying to use this as a way to kind of slowly back away in case Trump loses. Then they can say, well, we saw it and we feel there should be a different vision. And it's not like, we remember, okay, we're going to remember this is in perpetuity. Twitter and social media and YouTube put these things in the permanent record. You're not going to be able to just escape that. And all the people who are enablers through this whole thing are not going to just be able to slither away and think that people aren't going to remember this. There's a couple, just shifting gears a little bit. There's a couple of areas that I know people have some interest in that we can touch on really quickly in our last 12 minutes that we have. Some big news items that happened last week that didn't get the type of attention that they should have. We have the DNC going on. People are getting arrested, like Steve Bannon, kind of a big deal. But the Senate Intelligence Committee came out with a report.
The Rubio report.
The Rubio report, yes. That, if you've been following the Russia hoax, it's not a hoax, people. It's very, very real. And the Senate Intelligence Committee has been doing their own investigation into this in a parallel investigation along with Mueller and everything else. They've kind of been quietly doing their work. And they finally issued their final report. Now, what's significant about this is that the Senate Intelligence Committee report is bipartisan. It was signed off by both Democrats and Republicans. Marco Rubio, who, has been quite the disappointment. We've been giving him a lot of shit about this Rubio report. If you noticed last week, we had that hashtag. We were pushing it out to remind people of his inability to stand up to Trump when it matters because he knows better. Rick Wilson, what was in that report that was so significant that people who are watching this should know?
That everything out of Donald Trump's mouth about saying that there were no connections to Russia is, as most things are, a filthy lie. This report, chapter and verse, went through the connections, the connections that were not even reported by Bob Barr's elided version of the Mueller report that show that the Russians not only had an interest in electing Donald Trump, but they were active participants, that Trump's henchmen like Roger Stone were in direct connections with the Russian intelligence front WikiLeaks, that the people around him were well aware of the Russians' activities. They were accepting the help from a hostile foreign power. And this report, what you really should know out of this report is that the men and women on that committee in the Republican Party have been aware of this information for a year and a half. They understood this for a year and a half, and they've let him continue to run roughshod over this country and this Constitution. They knew exactly what kind of man he was in terms of the corruption with a foreign power when they handled the Ukraine matter, and they exonerated him before they even took it to a Senate trial. It is a startling abrogation of their duty. It is a disgusting reflection on their poor character. These are low men and low women. They have chosen political expedience over the security of this country. That's what this report really brings home.
And not only that, senators like Ron Johnson, who's the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, they are actually helping the Russians push these conspiracy theories against Biden and trying to mask it as some legitimate investigation that he's involved in. I mean, Senator Johnson is taking information that's coming in that's part of a Russia disinformation campaign against Joe Biden, which is absolutely despicable. So, you have all of these conflicting messages coming out of the Republicans. You have the Senate Intelligence Committee report that's had to be signed off by Mitch McConnell also in order for it to be published. It's kind of the way these things work in the Senate. People can't take a crap without Mitch McConnell telling you how much toilet paper to use. So that's significant. We cannot, understate the significance of that.
Right.
Yet you have Ron Johnson out here running around, espousing Russian disinformation. And it's they all need to be held accountable. So if you live in Wisconsin, hold Ron Johnson accountable for that. Another issue that I think we can talk about really quickly, Steve Schmidt. I know Rick wants to talk about Steve Bannon, but Steve, when you saw that Steve Bannon had been arrested, the one of the how many now of the Trump campaign folks, or have we gotten now to add to the list? When you found out that he had been arrested for fraud, what were you thinking?
Well, I was actually on a Zoom call with Rick Wilson, and I've never seen such ebullience and joy ever in my life. I've never seen just joyfulness, unadorned joyfulness. Just a smile that could have lit up the night sky from Rick Wilson. But no, I just think it's so crazy to think about it. So, I mean, you couldn't write this stuff and have anybody possibly believe that, it was real, right? It would be too strange as a work of fiction. It wasn't just that he was arrested. He was arrested by postal agents, arriving by seaplane to the yacht of the Chinese billionaire that he was on, for defrauding people about the wall, which across this country, apparently $25 million raised to build the wall. I mean, it's just incredible. And it just speaks to the crookedness. This man, by the way, Donald Trump put him on the National Security Council, and they didn't have the CIA director on the National Security Council.
Right. They carved out some kind of special thing for him, and then they ended up having to rescind it.
Right. I mean, total scumminess just everywhere you look. I mean, it's a crime family is what it is. They're stealing everything they can get their hands on the way out the door. The corruption is just absolutely extraordinary.
Yep. And this also comes from the Southern District of New York, which is the same U.S. Attorney's Office that Bill Barr tried to unceremoniously fire the U.S. Attorney there, Berman, and back in July. I mean, a lot of people were like, why? Because the SDNY is notoriously independent from Main Justice. And it was clear it's because there's lots of things in the pipeline there, SDNY, that are Trump adjacent or directly related to Donald Trump. And that is something that, we need to pay attention to what's going on at the SDNY. I suspect that we're not going to hear the last of Steve Bannon and his legal troubles, because he was also mentioned in the Senate Intelligence Report, and there were conflicting accounts given by him and Eric Prince and others about Russian collusion, who knew what and when during the campaign, and it is illegal to lie under oath to Congress. So, I just suspect, and that Chinese billionaire who owned the yacht he was on, they are also under investigation by the FBI for some $300 million media company investment that they have. So there's all kinds of God knows what happening there.
I just can't stop thinking about the scene as they're sitting on the yacht and the seaplanes coming in for a landing, padding up there like, oh, good, like they're bringing in breakfast again, right?
And what a surprise it was there. Oh my goodness. As we have 5 minutes left, Stuart Stevens, as we close out and prepare for the week ahead, which we were all lamenting before we went live, is going to be a shit show for the next couple of days. But when you look at the decency of some of the other Republican stalwarts that we think of, the Bush family, Reagan, et cetera, Jack Kemp, and the visionaries that we had, and you look at what we're about to see coming up in the next 4 days, what hope can you give people? Is there decency still there? Does it matter? Because I think that it does.
Yeah, I mean, the hope is that Trump's going to lose. For all this industry of why Trump won and Trump voters, on one level, he won for one simple reason. He ran in a year in which a Republican could win with 46.1%. I mean, Romney lost with 47.2%. So it's not like Donald Trump has put together this new coalition that's going to be dominant in the future. This isn't the future. The question is, do Republicans want to be part of the future, or do they want to become an irrelevant party? I mean, if you look at the country, of those 15 years and under, the majority are non-white. So they're going to turn 18 and be non-white. What does that mean for the Republican Party? What role are they going to see for themselves in a party that now is on the wrong side of a culture war with NASCAR? There's no future for that party. And what does that mean? That means that there won't be a coherent articulation of a center-right argument of governance, which right now no Republican can really give. I mean, say what you will about Elizabeth Warren. She can articulate a theory of government. You can hold it, you can love it, but you can fight with it. And she'll defend it. No one can do that with credibility on the right. So what Republicans have to decide is, it's one of my favorite clients and friends is Haley Barbour from Mississippi. And Haley used to say, be for the future. It's going to happen anyway. And
the last time we had a decent RNC chairman, Haley. I actually have a coffee mug that I got from a convention that says "Coffee with Haley" because he used to do these little events during conventions, and I still have that mug.
So that's the question for the Republican Party: is do you want to be a relevant party that is going to help decide big questions of the country, or do you want to be just this sort of coalition of weirdos that says no, that is in the business of trying to beat Democrats, which isn't, that's a cartel. That's not a political party. There's no policy now in the Trump campaign. There's nothing you can say that they're for except beating Democrats. And you can't build a political party like that and sustain it.
That's right. You can't build a political party on owning the libs. That's just, right. I think that's what the founding fathers had in mind. As we bring it home, Rick Wilson, just a little housekeeping. Everyone, if you haven't subscribed to the Lincoln Project, please subscribe to our Facebook, our Twitter, our YouTube, sign up. If you want to donate and help us continue doing what we're doing, please do that also. That was wonderful. The generosity, thank you to everyone and the generosity so far supporting the Lincoln Project efforts. We could not be here or do this without the support of the American people. And the righteous anger of the American people, I think, is something that we cannot lose sight of. That this is, if there's ever a time to exhibit your righteous anger to change things, if you don't feel comfortable with the direction the country is going in, now is the time to do that. And the Lincoln Project will be adding another person tomorrow. We have an announcement coming that we can't reveal it now, but tomorrow afternoon during MSNBC's Deadline White House with the wonderful Nicole Wallace, there will be an announcement. So stay tuned for that. And thank you guys all for being here.
One other thing.
Oh, no, Rick Wilson, I'm gonna let you take it home, my friend.
Well, folks, last week we did 4 days of live streaming during the Democratic convention, and it was an experiment, but we got to the point where we had almost 275,000 views the last couple nights. Folks really seem to enjoy it. We're going to be doing that again this week with the Republican convention with, I promise you, 5,000% more spite. And we're gonna tell some hard truths about what we're seeing on the stage from these various Trump's family members and sycophants at this so-called convention. So the live streams will be posted on our Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc. Hope you guys can join us. Those are going to be every night of the RNC this week. There'll be a pre-show and a post-game show. And if you're lucky, we might do a little Mystery Science Theater in the middle while Trump and others are speaking. So thank you for hosting tonight, Tara, and good to see you guys.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rick, Mike, Stuart, Steve Schmidt. Thank you, guys. And as I always say, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. So never be bullied into silence. And let's keep it going, guys, with this on the pirate ship. Ahoy, mateys.